Hello, everybody. Keith Bradbury back, and today we're going to be doing Kansas. We're going to be talking about their origins, the convoluted story of how they finally got to their first record. This is taking a ton of research. It is really hard to figure out, and I've had to follow lots of little leads here and there. And even though I've put all this together, there's still things I'm not 100% sure of. But here we go. We're going to look at the origins of the group Kansas. Yeah, that's the group that did "Carry On, Wayward Son," "Dust in the Wind," and a whole lot of other really popular songs. But we're going to go all the way back to a group called the Burlington Express. Now, that's a group that was around in the mid to late '60s in Kansas area, and you see the breakdown of the group there. Well, one of the people we're looking specifically at in this group is a man by the name of Greg Gucker, or also known as Greg Hartline. And the reason that his name is important is because he is the founder of another group called White Clover. Now, Greg Gucker, with Burlington Express, they actually released several LPs in 45s. So they had a fair amount of exposure in the Topeka, Kansas area, but then later, after Burlington Express dissolved, and they formed White Clover in 1969 with Phil Ehart. And Greg Allen was also in there, and Greg Allen's a name that'll pop up again, and some other people like that. Now, Phil Ehart is the man who would be the original drummer for Kansas. He's been on every Kansas album since, so he's kind of the key person that we'll follow along here as we look at the formation of the group Kansas. Now, White Clover started in 1969 with that lineup. And somewhere in 1969 and 1970, Rich Williams joined the band, and the band moved to New Orleans. Now, I don't have a breakdown of what the band was made up of in New Orleans, but something tells me that somebody left because they didn't want to leave the Kansas area, and the rest of the group went there, and Rich Williams was brought in to play on guitar. And he had previously been in a band with Phil Ehart known as the Pets. So that's where we first find Rich Williams. Well, Rich Williams apparently didn't like the whole process. They were living above, it sounds like they were living above a bar, and he said he was sleeping right above a jukebox. And, so it just was a really bad experience for him. So he actually left and decided to pursue an education. That White Clover band there dissolved. It broke apart, and another band formed in 1970, and this one was called Kansas. But it actually came from a previous group that was called the Kansas Blues Bands, and it had bassist Dave Hope and a man named Daryl Katz, who were together in the Kansas Blues Band, and later it was shortened to Kansas and reformed with Phil Ehart, again, drummer for White Clover, who would be the drummer for Kansas from that day on, and then Kerry Livgren was also in this early group of Kansas in 1970. This lineup didn't last a year. Now, I do have a note here that Kerry Livgren was formerly with a band called the Gimlets. So, we've got another band name to throw in there. There are so many different bands involved in this entire process. That was one of the things that was difficult because the more you look at each of the members, they're coming from different bands. And what was going on as I read about these things is all these bands were, in a lot of ways, financial failures. The more that people stayed in the band, the poorer they became. And it wasn't very long before these bands just fell apart. And those who really wanted to be musicians had to keep on going from group to group to group, trying to reform and reform with those who were going to be willing to stick with it, while those who couldn't financially stay in there. And also, you'll notice Greg Allen is in there. He came over from White Clover with Phil Ehart into this group of Kansas in 1970. But like I said, it didn't last very long. So here's a little relationship thing I did here so you can see how Greg Gucker connects between Burlington Express and White Clover. Phil Ehart and Greg Allen connect between White Clover and early Kansas. Now, this is Kansas number one and the picture of the band, so you can see the different band members there with, again, Phil Ehart, Lynn Meredith, And actually, Lynn Meredith would stick with Kansas after Phil leaves and form another version of Kansas and actually do some music. So that's he was singing, and he would actually do some. They would do some recording. We'll get into a little bit of that. But now we want to look at is after this group breaks up, White Clover forms again, this time with Steve Walsh joining them for vocals. And of course, Steve Walsh is kind of the key vocalist for Kansas. Sang on all their most of the really popular songs, along with a man named Robbie Steinhardt. But we'll get to him later. He's not in the band yet. But in 1971, this version of White Clover shows up, and they've got Warren Eisenstein and Phil Ehart again. Dave Hope went from Kansas to White Clover, and Jeff Glixman is in there on Hammond organ. Now, Jeff Glixman is an important name because he would later be producing some Kansas albums in the future, even though he was not really playing with the band, but he was kind of considered the sixth band member for a long period of time, because he would go along with them and basically help in production of albums and everything like that. So here we have White Clover starting to go along here. And White Clover, this version of White Clover didn't last very long, because at some point this one broke up as well, and Phil Ehart went to the United Kingdom. So this band probably didn't last but less than a year in this form. So here we have White Clover in its third iteration, but again, it didn't last very long. Meanwhile, Kansas, on the other hand, in 1971, reformed with this lineup of Don Montre, Dan Wright, Zeke Lowe, Rod McKinsky, Lynn Meredith, John Bolton, and Kerry Livgren. And again, Kerry Livgren is our key person that we're following on this side of things, because he would be the one later in Kansas who would write a lot of the big songs that everybody knows, like Carry On Wayward Son and Dust in the Wind. So that's who we're following over here primarily. However, this group was incredibly important because it actually recorded some material, and later those materials from 1971 through 1973, while Kansas number 2 was formed, those songs would be released on an album called Protocol, which is early recordings for Kansas from 1971 to 1973. That actually came out in 2002 on Cuneiform Records. So here, even though it was recorded before Kansas became popular, it was released long after Kansas had kind of gone by the wayside. Now, the music on this is really interesting. It's very proggy. In fact, Kerry Livgren is the prog person in Kansas. If you listen to the White Clover stuff is more blues rock. Kansas, on this side of things, with Kerry Livgren, was very prog, doing long songs, doing things that were very avant-garde. Vocally, Lynn Meredith in this is somewhere between Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull and David Pack of Ambrosia. That's kind of where I find him, kind of right between those two singers. If you took a little bit of both elements and combined them into one, I find it kind of being right in there between that. So it's a really proggy album. This is a great album to get too. So that's a good one to get. Now, if you go all the way back to when we're talking about Burlington Express, they sound a bit like the Byrds, in my opinion. So you've got a group that went from the Byrds sounding to being more blues rock. Then over here you've got prog rock going on here. Now, what we're going to look at next is White Clover, the fourth iteration, which started sometime in late 1972, it sounds like, to 1973. And this became the lineup that was the core group of the future Kansas that would be recorded. You got Robbie Steinhardt, you got Dave Hope, you got Rich Williams, Phil Ehart, and Steve Walsh. Now, Rich Williams and Dave Hope were together in a band called Plain Jane prior to this. And so they came in here. Basically, when Phil came back over from the UK, he tried to kind of hit it off over there with some bands over there. Kind of came back and it didn't work out for him. And he's like, well, let's reform White Clover again. And he grabbed all the people he could, and he found Robbie Steinhardt was now available because his band called Greywhack had collapsed. So he grabbed him to be part of it too. And of course, Robbie Steinhardt's where we get the violin in the group Kansas. At this time, they recorded 6 demos, and they mailed them off to Don Kirshner. And it was under the White Clover name when they mailed those off. They mailed it off before Kerry came over. So the song that Don Kirshner heard that caused him to want to sign the band was the song "Can I Tell You." So they had recorded a demo of that, and the demo version sounds a lot like the album version, but the album version is a little more fleshed out. But it's a really good song. But meanwhile, over on the Kansas side of things, they fell apart shortly after. That was mailed off to Kirshner, and Kirshner expressed interest in Kansas. So Phil Ehart grabbed Kerry Livgren and got him to come over, and that's when they took the name Kansas, since the other Kansas had fallen apart, and they didn't like the name White Clover, and they wanted to use the name Kansas. So now you had Kansas, and again, if we look at who was in Kansas before, Phil Ehart was in Kansas before. Dave Hope was in Kansas before. Of course, Kerry Livgren. So you have three people who were in Kansas in a prior iteration, and now you have the new guys coming in. And this was the Kansas that was recorded in 1973 for the album Kansas. So that's kind of a convoluted history of how Kansas began between the bands White Clover and everything else. And one other last interesting thing was in 2012 there was a White Clover reunion, and that White Clover reunion included band members Rich Williams, Jeff Glixman, Dave Hope, Phil Ehart, Greg Hartline, Greg Allen, Bill Fast, and Warren Eisenstein. So they all got together and they performed live as a group again. So kind of an interesting story there. So I hope you got something out of that, because like I said, when we're looking back at the history of Kansas, I had to research this thing like crazy. And even when I got done, I wasn't sure I got it all right. But this is as close as I could find of who was what and where during those early years, from the late 60s into the early 70s, before they became solidified as the band that released the albums. So hope that helps you understand the origins of the group Kansas. Catch us on the next time.